So now that we've added all our bones and done our basic rigging for the character, we're going to add smart actions to those bones to enhance our rig further. Let's start with this front arm and see what we can do with that. With the upper arm bone selected, I'll just use the Actions palette to create a new smart action. The action on the shoulder is pretty simple. We just need to change the shape of the top sleeve so it looks like there's a consistent seam where the shoulder joins the jacket. Then we'll set up a second action for the arm moving forward. And here we can even have the body of the jacket get pulled forward along with the shoulder. The action on the elbow is much trickier. We need the crease to look natural over the whole course of the bend. It can be tricky when the arm bends this far. It's best to start at the beginning and gradually work the points into their end position. Good. Now, one last thing on this arm. On the hand bone, I'm going to add actions that move the cuff of the sleeve out of the way when the hand bends. Next, we'll do the actions for the chest bone bending. We want to control how the jacket and the shirt flex. The bottom of the jacket should retain more of its original shape, but the front of the shirt should bunch up more. And don't forget about the hidden parts of the jacket too. Then let's do the knees. These are pretty easy, not a lot of lines to manage here. The boots, however, are much trickier. We need to make sure that the big heel retains its shape as it gets pushed by the bone. Other than that, it's mostly a matter of making sure the lines for the other parts of the boot stay lined up. And I'm actually going to have the perspective on the sole shift a little too. Okay, now for the skirt. I'm going to attempt to make actions that will account for the leg's position. It's pretty easy if only one leg is moving at a time, but we'll need to test to see how it looks when we move both of them. At this point, we've got a ton of actions in the Actions palette, so let's organize those into folders to keep track of them. So to test out our rig, I'm going to add target bones to the arms and legs. I'm going to put them at the wrists and ankles so that the hands and feet are free for us to rotate how we want. I'm also going to add some limits to the bone rotations so it'll behave more predictably. Once we get into situations where the character is rotated, these kinds of limits might actually get in the way. But for testing purposes, they're going to be very helpful. Here's a tip. If you're using a target bone and the limb doesn't seem to want to bend the right way, use the Transform Bone tool and hold Alt to try to move the bone to bend the other direction. Once you do that, it should work. Now that we've got the legs bending, we can see the skirt is in fact messed up. The actions from both thigh bones are combining to push the skirt too far. So we'll need to handle that in a different way. First of all, I'm going to clear the point binding on the skirt. and just make all the parts of it layer bound to the hip. Then, instead of using the thigh bones to drive the smart actions that distort the skirt, I'm going to set up 2 control bones so we can just adjust the shape of the skirt directly by hand. Starting with the skirt front control, I'll set up an action to try to define the max range of how far forward one of the legs might come. Fortunately, the range is kind of limited by how far she could realistically stretch while wearing a skirt anyway. Then for the other direction, we'll try to define how far back the skirt might go if both legs were back. Then for the skirt back control, we'll do the same for the back edge of the skirt. We want it to curve underneath when it comes forward, and then flare out when it goes back. Okay, now back on the main timeline. I've temporarily disabled the target bones so we can just put the legs in a position and then use the skirt controls to match up the skirt accordingly. I think that's going to work pretty good. So that's it for the basic rig. We can try moving her around, and the actions seem to be working pretty well. It's a little bit of a bummer that the skirt has to be controlled by hand, but it's still pretty easy and will give good results in the end. So that's it for the main bones and actions for the body. Next, we're going to use more bones and smart actions to set up rotation controls that will let us turn different parts of the body toward and away from the camera. We'll do that in the next video. I'll see you there.